So I haven't yet noticed an analysis of Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. I don't want to do a complete analysis, but I want to kind of open the conversation because I'm sure there's stuff that I've missed. And so before I go too far down any one of the rabbit holes, I want to sort of make a clearing in the forest, so to speak, so that we can see a broad overview of what we're looking at. First of all, the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is based off Roald Dahl's book, which is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So obviously there's a discrepancy here. There's a sort of inversion. Now, I want to expand on that topic of inversion and talk about how here it is applied. So Roald Dahl, he's an interesting guy. I want to kind of skip to the juicy bits. In 1983, Roald Dahl started saying, "I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Israel." And then he said in 1983 again, "There's a trait in the Jewish character that does provoke animosity. I mean, there is always a reason why anti-anything crops up anywhere. Even a stinker like Hitler didn't just pick on them for no reason." And then he said, explaining in 1990 now, explaining he was talking about the invasion of Lebanon in 1982. He said, "They killed 22 civilians," referring to Israel. "It was hushed up in the newspapers because they're primarily Jewish owned. I'm certainly anti-Israeli, and I've become anti-Semitic in as much as that you get a Jewish person in another country like England strongly supporting Zionism." So in 2014, the Royal Mint was considering adding Roald Dahl to a coin to commemorate him. And they chose not to do that because there were protests that he was associated with anti-Semitism and could not be regarded as an author of the highest reputation, although he did have Jewish friends, including Isaiah Berlin, who said, "I thought he might say anything. Could have been pro-Arab or pro-Jew. There was no consistent line. He was a man who followed whims, so he could blow up in one direction or another, so to speak." These are all paraphrases. I'm not exactly quoting here. You can look it up yourself if you want to read the exact quote. And this is Amelia Foster of the Roald Dahl Museum, who of course wants to protect his reputation, saying he was very angry at the Israelis. He had a childish reaction. He wanted to provoke. His publisher was a Jew. His agent was a Jew. He thought nothing but good things of them. He asked me to be the managing director, and I'm Jewish. So again, he's not a neo-Nazi. That would be a caricature of him. And he was a man of caricature who loved caricature. But he was obviously not a neo-Nazi. He was a flying ace, actually. He was a wing commander in World War II. But there is a clear tension here, because then you look at the film, and the film is now Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. Now it's Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. And who is Willy Wonka? Well, Willy Wonka is Gene Wilder. And is Gene Wilder who Roald Dahl wanted? No, Roald Dahl didn't want Gene Wilder, actually. We can find out who he did want. I'm trying to figure out. There was a whole controversy with the casting. So Spike Milligan, who is a British-Irish comedian, was Roald Dahl's original choice to play. And actually, if you're familiar with Roald Dahl's illustration at all, and you just look at Spike Milligan, he is he's very Dahl-esque. He looks like someone who, could be the anthropomorphization of a Roald Dahl illustration. Then you also had Peter Sellers wanted the role, but it was Wilder who accepted it and who got it. Very interesting thing. Jean Stapleton was turned down for the role of Miss TV. If you're interested in physiognomy, look at Jean Stapleton and then look at who was actually cast, and that was Nora Denny. And you look at the physiognomy of Nora Denny and you look at Jean Stapleton, and there's something interesting going on there. Anyway, basically there's this conflict. Now I'm going to turn to the notes of it's basically Willy Wonka and the Capitalist Factory. So the original Willy Wonka, Roald Dahl, what does he intend to do there? What's his inversion? What's going on? You could say that there is an happy aspect to the whole thing. You could say that, Willy Wonka is a positive figure, but it's not entirely clear in the movie. There are some other interesting racial tidbits here, and people have noticed this already in the mainstream and on the left, that the Oompa Loompas are basically African pygmies. Now, Roald Dahl, in response, he wanted to say, I'm not racist, so his widow said after his death that Charlie, from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, was originally a little black boy, but the publisher or the agent said that would not appeal to the readers, so the race was changed from black to white. So, I mean, there's some interesting things going on here all over the place. But in terms of who is Willy Wonka? Well, who is Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka? Because ultimately, you look at the reaction of Dahl, and he says he didn't like it. He disowned the film, and specifically, he didn't like the casting of Gene Wilder instead of Spike Milligan. He didn't like the deviations. He didn't like how things were changed. So, I mean, sometimes people come up with superficial reasons for why they don't like something instead of just recognizing maybe the deeper, more simplistic, but sometimes more offensive reasons. So we'll look at Gene Wilder and the meme that has come out of Gene Wilder. And he has the kind of smile. He's got his hand on his chin and he's smiling and he's saying, "Oh, aren't you so naive? You think it's this way, but it's actually this way." So it's a really contemptuous smile. It's a negative smile. It's not like an endearing, happy smile. It's not like, "Oh, you sweet summer child. Oh, we're going to teach you how it is." It's like, "You scum of the earth, ignorant redneck bastards. You think it's this way. You think Trump's going to save you." And now, whether the meme has been, I'm sure the meme has been used in that specific context of Trump, but it really was popular much before him. But what's interesting there is that there was this, memetics itself is interesting in the way that people will take the face of Gene Wilder as the character Willy Wonka, and they look at his personality. Plenty of people have seen the movie and they understand the context of that character, and they look at him and they see him as a character full of like this contempt and this smile that's not a happy smile, that's not a kind smile, but it's a smile of "I know something you don't know," a smile of "I'm laughing at your ignorance." It's a sadistic smile. So my interpretation is that the physiognomy of Gene Wilder, the way he plays that character, he's really a sort of a sadistic man. And there's two scenes where this really comes out. The first is the scene which, when I saw this as a child, I was just very disturbed. The scene where they're going through the tunnel of nightmares and there's like insects and it's disgusting. And I would interpret that today kind of being the underbelly of the capitalist system. Now, on the surface, everything's candy, everything's roses, everything's beautiful. But underneath the surface, it's this primordial, primeval, uck and ooze and insects and just disgusting Chthonian underbelly. Everything's based on lust and desire. And Willy Wonka is like a madman. He's insane. And that's where you see his true inner mind, his true inner desire, is this is to see people suffer, to see them. He really is a demon, the way that he's portrayed. And I never really understood that scene. I didn't understand why it was there. Now, you could say simply it was there to provide contrast. And the whole... I guess the outer explanation or the logical explanation is that, well, he's testing these children and he wants to see which one's most courageous, so he's putting them under all these psychological stresses, which, kind kind of makes sense in the context of it's a film that relies heavily on child acting, and we know the relationship of Hollywood to child actors. It's an abusive relationship, but one that Hollywood constantly justifies, saying that no, it's a beautiful thing. We're making art, we're making entertainment, we're bringing joy to millions of children. So, these children, they're working hard, but they're doing so of their own volition. So you see the whole ethos that's here. And again, when I'm saying this, it's kind of hard at the same time to recognize that there is an original Roald Dahl book called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And Roald Dahl did have a certain perspective on life that is a kind of cranky, what's the word I'm looking for? The sort of a phlegmatic view on life. This irritable view of people being sort of nasty, and that there's, these, and it's kind of a Dickensian view of the world, if you think about it, but that people are nasty, and so they kind of get what's coming to them eventually in this sort of revenge fantasy. So I mean, that's a perspective in and of itself, but I want to see how that perspective is it is adopted, or it's adapted, and it's morphed into something a little bit different. So that perspective of how these children are sort of done in by their own lusts within the capitalist system. So the children sort of represent various consumer classes. You have the obese child, you have the child who's prideful, you have all these childs, they have their different lusts, and the capitalist can sort of entice them, and these children then, they, die metaphorically. They don't die literally, but it's like, he just went into a pipe and he drowned, but I'm sure he'll turn up somewhere alive. It'll be fine. But, there are these basically implied deaths that, one dies from being drowned in chocolate, and one dies from exploding, from growing too large, and another dies in this way, another dies in that way, and they're sort of rolled off screen, right? So you have the excuse to say, no, they didn't die, but there's an implied death there, that this endless consumption leads to death. And the one who's pure of heart, the one who is not focused on their own pleasure, but they want to be truthful and honest and do the greater good, that's going to be the one who survives, and that's kind of how it ends up. So in that sense, there is a good moral to the story, but it's mixed. The other scene I want to point out for Gene Wilder is the scene "Good Day, Sir." And that scene, I was like, yeah, this confirms everything that I think about Willy Wonka. He's a bad guy. The anger on his face, and the way that there's something very sadistic about his face in that scene, the "Good Day, Sir" scene, that I found very disturbing. And what came after it sort of seemed like an add-on. Or there's like a concept of a Hays Code. If you look back in Hollywood, there were a lot of restrictions on Hollywood because Hollywood was always out of pace with the rest of society. And so there's a bunch of reasons for that I don't need to go to in this video. But basically, the Hays Code came in and said, look, Hollywood is far to the left, or it's far outside the scope of what we consider obscene, or what people would consider normal morality, like if you're reading a book. The other thing about Hollywood is to read like Edgar Allan Poe, you need an advanced knowledge of reading, and you need to have a certain interest in that. People understood very early on that Hollywood and the movie industry was something that attracted children because of its visual nature, and therefore there was a lot of concern about, okay, so maybe there are books out there which have adult themes, but there's a certain level of impenetrability, or there's a certain level where children are not exposed to that, or not attracted to risque books or adult themes in literature, whereas movies open up very adult themes or very negative themes or morally bad themes to a young audience who are attracted to it purely because of the visual nature of it. So there was a Hays Code. And the Hays Code would say things like, the bad guys can't win in the end, because that sends a bad message to the youth. And so you'd have perhaps a film where the bad guys are winning, and then in the end they die and are brought to justice. So it's sort of a deus ex machina, or machina, however, deus ex machina. I don't know what it's Latin, isn't it? I don't know how the Romans would have pronounced that, but anyway. Deus ex machina, I suppose. They kind of have that sort of Hays Code ending here, where in my interpretation of it is that Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka, really is a bad guy. He is the villain of the film. He's the capitalist who has, like a Pied Piper, he's attracted all these children into his factory of consumption. He's offered them various addictive, maybe some social media. He's offered them some opiates. He's offered them some porn industry. He's offered them all these different things, video games, and they have fallen prey to their own lusts, and they have really died as a result. And he's sort of ruling, and he's very sadistic, evil, negative force. He puts on a smile, he puts on a face, but that's a front. And so for me, the film really ends at "Good day, sir," and that's it. And then when Charlie, he comes back and he leaves the little candy, and then it's like, oh, transhumanism. We're gonna have the space tower, space elevator. We're gonna go off into space now. Again, it feels like a Hays Code ending. Feels like something written in. But my feeling of the film was always that Gene Wilder was the villain of the film. So I don't know. I'm sure there's a whole lot more to go through. If you could do your own analysis of the book, and then you could do the movie separately, and you could go specifically into each scene and do a full movie analysis of what that would be. I don't know if people are interested in that, and I find a copy of the film, I could theoretically go through it. But I think that's all for now. Looking forward to your feedback. So thank you for listening. Bye-bye.